land of the free. Farewell to the land of the brave.
This is the former site of the Douglass family farm, now the Anna Murray Douglass Academy, named in honor of Frederick Douglass's wife.
I have an industrious and neat companion and 4 dear children. These dear children are ours, not to work up into rice, sugar, and tobacco, but to train them in the paths of wisdom and virtue.
When Frederick Douglass moved his family to South Avenue from their first Rochester home on Alexander Street in 1852, this was bucolic farm country on the edge of the city. Douglass was not, however, looking for more space or a closer experience with nature. He was, in fact, looking to better safeguard the many self-freed people who sought him out in Rochester.
It wasn't uncommon, and the work of Frederick was so well known that when they reached Rochester, there were several spots, this being one of them, and she often had people staying in the house, hiding, for a day or two, sometimes longer, until they could get to the next spot. And then eventually their goal was to get to the lake and then over into Canada.
19th century American cities were face-to-face walking cities. In a city of 30,000 or so in 1850, the arrival of freedom seekers would not have gone without notice. Weary and lost African American men wandering around looking for Douglass's home would have attracted some attention. Many times he found a number of such fugitives from slavery waiting for him on the steps of the Tallman Building. Although many people in Rochester were sympathetic to the freedom seekers, not all were in agreement, and even in Rochester, self-freed people faced hostility and danger. By moving to a farm on the outskirts of town, Douglass could continue to shelter more fugitives more safely. Douglass, his wife Anna, and their children sheltered and aided hundreds of self-freed people while they lived in Rochester. Both their South Avenue home and the Alexander Street home were replete with secret compartments and other Underground Railroad amenities. Douglass was in Washington, D.C., employed as a recruiter for the Union Army when he learned his South Avenue home burned down and that it was likely arson.
So the home that burnt down, there's never been, I can tell you that it's a great tragedy for the city of Rochester and for Douglass historians because everything was lost there. All his personal papers, entire runs of the North Star. It's still very difficult to get some issues of the North Star, and Frederick Douglass paper and his personal belongings, everything was lost in that. And so in a way, I think that's one of the reasons that Douglass has taken so long, that it's taken Rochester so long to become the home for Douglass. Because in fact, once that happened, it was very, very difficult for historians to write a history of Douglass in Rochester.
The arson at Frederick Douglass's home on South Avenue is one of the great untold stories. You can research this and you will find very little information. It was poorly investigated. There is so little in the public record that shows any accounting for what happened. And it's so terrible because we lost so much of his writing.
It was also a terrible loss for the city of Rochester. Without the house and the papers, Douglass moved his family to the suburbs of Washington, D.C., and his archive and his home are there today.
At the time, there were rumors that it was done by folks who were white supremacists who were for the Confederacy. It was done during the Civil War. Douglass was a key player in the war, recruiting African-American soldiers and obviously constantly agitating for abolition. So it's quite possible that it was an act of vandalism or terrorism, whatever you want to call it. But I don't think there's any evidence either way. And so we'll never know.
Both Frederick and Anna were very close to Rochester in that they felt that that was a big part of their home.
The effect of it altered the trajectory of Mr. Douglass's life again. He decides that he's moving. He moved first to Hamilton Street and then eventually to Anacostia, which is outside of Washington, D.C., where his home is now.
the land of the free. Farewell to the land of the brave.